Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairy Tales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel. It's a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative, mostly. And if you are watching this live, you should know that there is a live chat right now that is growing a little crop of potatoes. It is growing discussions, and I see GS and Jumpstore already in there. Uncle Kitty saying that he will watch later. Yeah, you can join in, talk about the story as we read along with it. Or if that's not your bag, or if you're not watching this live, down in the description below there is timestamps, which will jump you ahead to the beginning of the story that we're reading tonight, which is called Kari, Woodenskirt. I see Jumpstore says that they're babysitting a 4-month-old. It's very young to be babysitting. Wow. I wouldn't trust myself with a 4-month-old. I feel like I would do something wrong and hurt them. I see Tammy is in there. I see Lizzie Rose. Good to see you folks. Hopefully the sound and all that is sounding as it should. I don't really have a ton to say tonight. Other than tonight's story comes to us from the Asbjørnsen and Moe collection that we were reading last week and a couple of weeks before that, which comes from our translation by Simon Roy Hughes, a recently published, most complete ever annotated translation of all of Asbjørnsen and Moe, who are very much the Grimm brothers of Norwegian folklore. They're, if you're really out of the loop on this, they are long past. They did all their collecting and writing in the 19th century. But their works have been translated before, but I would say this is the best one. You can purchase it for yourself, by the way, in physical book form or as a digital book, annotated or unannotated, by clicking on a pinned comment, which I will have in the comments below when this video is no longer live. Oh, I see. There are some family issues, Jumpstore. I'm sorry to hear that. Now, as for me, I chose this story last week on the assumption that September would be the month where things cooled down. And today, it is very warm. All of a sudden. Kind of just today, too, according to our weather. So we'll see how I do. This is not a short story. Well, I mean, it is. It's not like a book, but it's relative to the stories we normally read. This is a longer tale. And it also belongs to that collection of tales. We've seen a couple in the Asbjørnsen and Moe books and other places that really kind of emphasizes something that I found interesting. I was talking to a friend this week and sort of found the word for this. Folklore is treated as if it is its own genre, but something I'll say about genre is that genre is I won't say it's a modern concept. It is kind of a modern concept, but how we encounter it is mostly a modern thing. It's mostly a modern marketing thing, to be honest. Like when people talk about what kind of books they write or whatever else, or ask me as an author what kind of books I write, it's a struggle to answer because that's a question that gets answered when they decide to take the book on. You know, you don't think about genre so much when you're writing it, for most people. Where it becomes helpful and where I find it interesting, and where I think this tale shows us a version of that, is that folklore doesn't so much have genres as it has tropes. So, you know, we associate tropes and genres to be together, but they don't necessarily come one in one, hand in hand. So the tropes of by tropes, another way to put it is like different sort of cycles that it attaches itself to. Themes, but that isn't quite right. Sometimes it's just sort of narrative structures of which could be very dark and grim content or very bright content, but its structure is sort of Beauty and the Beast or something like that. And that's what we'll see in this story. This is that sort of style where you get basically 3 stories glued together based around one character. At some point, she does wear a wooden skirt, and it does matter, but that is not in the first part, so don't feel like I've missold it. That the wooden skirt comes. Glad to hear your diet's going well, Tammy. Okay, so that's what was interesting to me about this tale, and that is a bit of context as to why I chose to read a very long tale on a very hot day. Let's see how it goes. Hopefully I don't have to break down and turn on the air conditioning, because it does affect the sound a bit. But I will help fool myself with a little bit of atmosphere. Our first tale tonight, and our only tale tonight, is called Kari Woodenskirt, and it comes to us from Simon Roy Hughes' translation of As Bjornson and Moe. It's a whole anthology and collection. This is the annotated edition. This is from the first volume, if you're looking to purchase for yourself. I will have that pinned comment down below when this video is no longer live, so you can buy it for yourself, which you should. It's a very good book. There was once upon a time a king who had become a widower. After his queen, he had a daughter who was so kind and beautiful that no one could be kinder or more beautiful. He grieved for his queen, whom he had held most dear for a long time. But finally he grew weary of living alone and married again. A widowed queen, who also had a daughter. But her daughter was as ugly and mean as the other was kind and beautiful. The stepmother and her daughter were envious of the king's daughter because she was so gorgeous. But for as long as the king was at home, they dared not do anything to her, for he held her dear. At length, the king went to war against another king, and rode out with his host. Then the queen thought she could do what she liked, and so she both starved and struck the king's daughter, and went after her in every corner. Finally, she considered all things too good for her, and so she made her go herding. Ooh, a princess herding, out with the animals. So she took the livestock and herded them in the forest and on the mountain. She got little or no food, grew pale and thin, and was sorrowful nearly the whole time. Amongst the livestock there was a great blue bull, which always kept itself so fine and sleek, and it often came to the king's daughter and let her pamper it. Once as she sat weeping and was again distraught, the bull came to her and asked her why she was so sorrowful. She did not reply, only continued weeping. "Well," said the bull, "I suppose I know, even though you won't tell me. You weep because the queen is so mean to you, and because she wants to starve you to death. But you don't have to look far for food. In my left ear is a tablecloth. When you take it, unfurl it. You can have as many dishes as you choose." And she did so. She took the tablecloth and unfurled it on the grass, and it dished up the finest dishes anyone could want. There was both wine and mead and sweet cake. She soon recovered and grew so round and red and white that the queen and her bickering daughter grew both blue and pale with vexation. The queen could by no means understand how her stepdaughter could still look so well on such poor food. So she instructed a maid to go after her into the forest and make sure to see how things hung together, for she thought that some of the servant folk must have been giving her food. So the maid went after her into the forest and watched, and saw how the king's daughter took the tablecloth from the blue bull's ear and unfurled it, and how it dished up the finest dishes, which the king's daughter satisfied herself from. The maid went home and told this to the queen, because maids in these stories are always little squealers. Now the king returned home, and he had defeated the other king whom he had been at war with. There was great joy throughout the whole castle, and no one was happier than the king's daughter. But the queen went to bed ill, and paid the doctor a lot of money, so that he would say that she would not grow well again. Oh, unless she was given the meat of the blue bull to eat. Both the king's daughter and the folk asked the doctor if nothing else could help, and begged for the bull, for all held him dear, and they said there was not the like of a bull in the whole kingdom. But no, it had to be slaughtered, and it would be slaughtered. There was no other remedy. When the king's daughter heard this, she was full of regret, and went down to the barn, to the bull. It stood there still, hanging its head, and looking so sorrowful that she began to weep. "Why are you weeping?" said the bull. So she told him that the king had returned home, and that the queen had gone to bed ill, and that she got the doctor to say that she could not be made well except that she should have the fresh meat of the blue bull, of him, that now he should be slaughtered. If first they kill me, then soon they will kill you too," said the bull. "If you're thinking the same as I do, then we shall go on our way tonight." Yes, the king's daughter thought it was bad enough to leave her father, but it would be even worse to remain in the house with the queen, and so she promised the bull she would come. In the evening, when everyone else had gone to bed, the king's daughter tiptoed down to the barn, and the bull, he put her on his back and went off as quickly as she could. Now the folks who were to slaughter the bull came up the next morning, and it had gone. And when the king came up and asked after his daughter, she too was gone. He sent messages out in all directions, searching for them, and advertised after them from the church mounds, but none had seen aught of them. Meanwhile, the bull went through many countries with the king's daughter on his back. And then they came to a great copper forest, where the trees and branches and leaves and blossoms were all things of copper. And then there is a drawing there of a very sweet-looking little bull. I can zoom in just a little bit for the drawing. Very sweet-looking little bull with a young lady on its back. And it turns back to look at her, and she is leaning down. And we'll see why. It tells us in the story in a moment. But before they went into the forest, the bull said to the king's daughter, "When we come into the forest, you must take care that you do not touch so much as a leaf of it, or it will be over, both for you and me. For a troll with 3 heads lives here and owns it." No, by the cross! She would take extra good care not to touch anything. She was so careful. to bend aside for the branches and push them away before her with her hands. But it was so densely forested that it was almost impossible to get through. And however careful she was, she eventually pulled off a leaf, which ended up in her hand. "Oh, what have you done now?" said the bull. "Now we shall have to fight for life and death. But hide the leaf well." Soon afterwards they came to the end of the forest, and then a troll with 3 heads came charging. "Who is it who touches my forest?" said the troll. "It's as much mine as it is yours," said the bull. "We shall quarrel about that," shrieked the troll. "We may well do so," said the bull, and they ran at each other and fought. The bull butted and kicked for all he was worth, but the troll struck out just as well, and it lasted the whole day before the bull put an end to it. And then he was so full of wounds and so poorly that he was hardly able to walk. And so they had to rest for a day. And the bull said to the king's daughter that she should take the grease horn that hung from the troll's belt and smear the bull with grease. Then he recovered, and the following day they set off on their way again. Just as a note here, if you are new, it's a really common trope, in particular in Norwegian folklore, as Bjornson and Mo collected it, but not exclusively them, for a grease horn to have curative properties. Grease horns, we've mentioned before, are usually like an animal fat rendered that they would use if they had to milk the teats of an animal or something like that, or anything that was going to dry out their fingers. But this idea of like it being a balm that cures all wounds, is especially associated to trolls, is super common. I don't have an explanation why that connection was made, but at some point someone made that connection and it became a trope. They traveled now for many, many days, and then at great, great length they came to a silver forest. The trees and branches and leaves and blossoms and all things were of silver. Before the bull went into it, he said to the king's daughter, "When we come now into this forest, you must for God's sakes be careful not to touch anything, not to pull off so much as a leaf, for otherwise it is over for both you and me. A troll with 6 heads owns it, and I do not think I can defeat it." Just some advice for this bull. Maybe don't go through the troll forest. You know, if it's a longer path but you don't die, take the longer path. "No," said the king's daughter. "I shall certainly take care not to touch it. Not to touch what you don't want me to touch." But when they came into the forest, it was so dense and close that they could hardly get through. She moved as carefully as she could, and bent herself aside for the branches, and pushed them away from her, before her, with her hands. But at every turn the twigs struck her in the eyes, no matter how careful she was, and eventually, inevitably, she pulled off a leaf. "Oh, what have you done now?" said the bull. "Now there will be a fight for life and death, for this troll has 6 heads and is twice the strength of the other. But just look after the leaf and hide it well." Just like that, the troll came. "Who is it who touches my forest?" "It's just as much mine as it is yours," said the bull. "We shall quarrel about that." "We may well do so," said the bull, and it charged the troll. and it butted out its eyes, and it drove its horns right through it, so that its entrails fell out. But it fought just as well, and it lasted for three unbroken whole days, 72 hours before the bull took its life from it. But then the bull was so poorly and hopeless that he could barely move, and so full of wounds that his blood ran. So he told the king's daughter that she should take the grease horn that hung from the troll's belt and smear him from it. This she did, and so he recovered, though they had to sleep there for a week before he could manage to go on. Finally they set off again, but the bull was still weak, and they did not go as quickly as they had at first. The king's daughter wanted to spare the bull, and said that she was so young and light-footed that she could walk, but she was not allowed. She had to sit upon his back again. Then they traveled at great length through many countries, and the king's daughter did not at all know where they were going, but at great length they came to a golden forest. It was so rich that the gold dripped from it, and the trees and branches and blossoms and leaves were of pure gold. Here things went the same way as in the copper forest and in the silver forest. The bull told the king's daughter that she must not at all in any way touch it, for a troll with 9 heads owned the forest, and it was much bigger and stronger than both of the others together, and the bull didn't think he could beat it at all. No, she would certainly mind herself and not touch the forest. He should know that. But when they came into the forest, it was even denser than the silver forest, and the farther they came into it, the worse it grew, and the forest grew denser and denser and tighter, and finally she thought that they could by no means come through it. She was so afraid of pulling something off that she sat and twisted and turned herself both here and there before the twigs and pushed them away before her with her hands, but everything struck her in the eyes so that she could not see where she grasped, and before she knew it, she had a golden apple in her hand. She was so heartily afraid that she wept, and would throw it away again, but the bull said that she should not, merely hide it well, and though he comforted her as well as he could, he thought there would be a hard struggle, and he doubted it would end well. And just like that, the troll came with 9 heads. It was so terrible that the king's daughter hardly dared to look at it. "Who it touches my forest?" it shrieked. "It is just as much mine as it is yours," said the bull. "We shall quarrel about that," shrieked the troll. "We may well do so," said the bull, and then they charged one another and fought. And it was so terrible to watch that the king's daughter was close to fainting. The bull butted out the troll's eyes and drove his horns right through it so that the entrails tumbled out, but the troll struck just as well, for when the bull managed to butt to death one of its heads, the others blew life back into it, and it was a whole week, 7 days of unbroken fighting before he was able to take its life from it. And then the bull was so poorly and weak that he couldn't move. He had wounds everywhere. He could not even say so much as instruct the king's daughter to take the troll's grease horn and smear him from it, but she did so anyways. And then he came to himself again. But they had to stay there and rest for 3 weeks before he was well enough to go on. Then they just about managed to set off again, for the bull said that they should go a bit farther. They went over many great densely forested hills. This lasted a while, and then they came up into the mountains. "Did you see anything?" asked the bull. Yes, I see a small castle, far, far away, said the king's daughter. It is not quite so small, said the bull. At great length they came to a great mound, where there was a sheer rock wall. Do you see anything now? Said the bull. Yes, now I see the castle close by. Oh, it is much, much bigger now, said the king's daughter, like an idiot. Oh, things get bigger when I get closer. That is where you are going, said the bull. Close below the castle is a pigsty. You shall go and find a wooden skirt. I bet you forgot that this story was called Kari Woodenskirt. You shall put it on, go up to the castle, and say that your name is Kari Woodenskirt, and ask to go into service. But now you shall take your penknife and cut my head off with it. Then skin me, roll the skin together, and lay it below the rock wall there. And you shall lay the copper leaf, the silver leaf, and the golden apple in the skin. Over by the rock there stands a stick. When you want something with me, then simply knock upon the rock wall with it. I don't know either. It only gets weirder. Everyone admitting they forgot in the chat. Yeah, so did I when I read this. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It's something about a skirt. After, at first, she would not. But the bull said that it was the only thanks he would accept for what he'd done for her, and so she could do nothing else. She thought it so heartily painful, but she toiled and cut the big animal with her knife until she got its head and skin off. Then she laid them together below the rock wall, and laid the copper leaf and the silver leaf and the golden apple in it. When she'd done this, she went over to the pigsty, and as she went, she wept, and was clearly distressed. There she put on the wooden skirt, and then she went to the king's farm. When came into the kitchen, she asked to go into service, saying she was called Kari Woodenskirt. Yes, said the cook, she could. She could stay there and do the washing up for the one who had done it before, had but newly left. Though when you grow tired of staying here, then you will probably go off on your way too, she said. No, that she would certainly not do. She was both quick and good at washing up. One Sunday strangers should come to the king's farm. So Kari asked leave to go with the prince's washing water, but the others laughed at her and said, What do you think? What do you want to do there? Do you think the princess wants anything to do with you, the way you look? She did not give in, though, but continued to beg until at last she was allowed to go. I do want to say, just before we get into this sort of end cycle, we still got a lot of story left, but we're in sort of the cycle of the ending here. You're not going to like the ending. If there was ever a story that could use a rewrite, this would be it. When she climbed the stairs, her wooden skirt rattled, so that the prince came out and asked, What manner of person are you? I was to bring you your washing water, said Kari. Do you think I want the water you carry? Said the prince, and he tipped the water over her, and with that she had to go. There's a picture there from the thumbnail of her in a dress stitched together by small pieces of rustic wood as a big skirt, otherwise dressed as a maid carrying a washing basin up the stairs. But then she asked leave to go to the church. She was allowed, for the church stood so close by. But first she went to the mountain and knocked with the stick that stood there, as the bull had instructed. Straightway there came out a man, asking what she wanted. The king's daughter said that she had now been given leave to go to church and listen to the parson, but that she had no clothes to wear. Then he brought her a dress, and it gleamed like the copper forest. And she received a horse and a saddle too. When she arrived at church, she was so beautiful and fair that everyone wondered who she was. And nearly no one listened to what the parson had to say, for they looked too much at her. The prince himself liked her so well that he could not take his eyes off her even for a moment. As soon as she left the church, the prince sprang after her and pulled the door close behind her, and kept one of her gloves in his hand. When then she mounted her horse, the prince came after her again, and asked her where she was from. "I am from Washerland," said Kari, being a terrible improv. And as the princess brought out her glove to give it to her, she said, "Light before and darkness behind, so the prince sees not whether I ride today." The prince had never seen the glove's equal, and he went both far and wide inquiring of the country the proud lady had said she was from, but no one could tell him where it lay. On Sunday, someone should go up with a towel for the prince. "Oh, may I have leave to go up with it?" said Kari. "What good would that do?" said the others in the kitchen. "You know how things went last time." But Kari did not give in. Continued to ask until she was allowed, and then she sprang up the stairs so that her wooden skirt rattled. The prince came out, and when he saw it was Kari, snatched the towel off her and threw it right in her face. "Off with you now, you ugly troll," he said. "Do you think I want a towel that's touched with your black fingers?" Afterwards, the prince went to church, and Kari had also asked leave to go, and they asked what she had to do in church, she who had nothing to wear other than that horrible black wooden skirt. But Kari said she thought the parson such a fine fellow to preach. It did her good to listen to what he had to say. And so she was finally allowed. She went to the mountain and knocked, and then the man came out. He gave her a dress that was much finer than the first. It was sewn with silver everywhere, and it shone like the silver forest. And she was given a fine horse with a silver embroidered mantle and a silver bridle too. When the king's daughter arrived at church, the church folk still stood outside on the mountain. Everyone wondered who she was. And the prince was soon at work, coming to hold her horse for her as she dismounted, but she jumped off and said that he need not bother, for the horse was so tame that it stood still when she told it to, and came when she called for it. Then they all went together into the church, but there was nearly no one who listened to what that parson had to say. They looked so much at her, and the prince was even more besotted with her than the last time. When the sermon was over, and she left the church, and should mount her horse, the prince again came and asked where she was from. "I'm, from Towland?" Sorry, I will read the story. Points in chat for what the denizens of Towland look like. Said the king's daughter, and then she let go of her riding crop, and when the prince bent over to pick it up, she said, "Light before and darkness behind, so the prince sees not whether I ride today." She was gone again, and the prince couldn't know what had become of her. He went both far and wide, inquiring after the country she had said she'd come from, but no one could tell him where it lay, and the prince had to settle down again, because apparently he's also as dumb as she is bad at lying. On Sunday, someone should go up to the prince. I don't mean he's dumb because he should know who it is. I can understand why he's not squaring those two things. He's barely looking at her. when she's a maid. But to think that Towelland after Washerland was a thing, I don't know. Maybe it's a translation thing. Now that I think about it, maybe there's more of a naming convention that would have made this seem more realistic. But in English, it's very funny. Lizzie Rose says this prince sounds like a catch. Oh, you wait. On Sunday, someone should go up to the prince with a comb. Kari asked leave to go with it, but the others reminded her how things had gone last time and scolded her for wanting to show herself to the prince, as black and as terrible as she was in her wooden skirt. But she did not give up asking before they let her go up to the prince with the comb, and when she came rattling up the stairs, the prince came out, took the comb, threw it after her, and told her to go away. Afterwards, the prince went to church, and Kari also asked leave. When they asked again what she had to do there, she, who was so black, and who had no clothes to show herself in among folk. By the way, black here means like dirty from work, though it is entirely possible that there was some other implication in it. I'm just saying that more traditionally that's what they mean in folklore. If the prince or anyone else saw her, they said, then both she and they would be unhappy. But Kari said that they had other things to look at, and she did not give up asking before she received leave to go. Now things went the same way as on both the previous occasions. She went over to the mountain and knocked on it with a stick. Then the man came out and gave her a dress that was much finer than the others. It was nearly pure gold, beset with diamond, and she received a gallant horse with a golden embroidered mantle and a golden bridle too. When the king's daughter arrived at church, the parson and the congregation were still outside, waiting for her. The prince came running and wanted to hold her horse for her, but she jumped off and said, "No, thank you. That is not necessary. My horse is so tame that it stands still when I tell it to." Then they all hurried into the church, and the parson went up to the pulpit, but no one listened to what he had to say, for they looked too much at her and wondered where she was from. And the prince was even more besotted than he had been on previous occasions. Oblivious, he continued looking at her. And when the sermon was over, the king's daughter should leave the church. The prince had tipped out a quarter of raw pitch in the vestibule, so that he might help her across it. What a wild thing to do, by the way. Just poured pitch in the church. But she did not pay attention to it, but put one foot in the midst of the pitch and sprang across, so that one golden shoe remained behind. And when she had mounted her horse, the prince came running out of the church and asked her where she was from. All together now. "From Combland," said Kari. When then the prince would reach the golden shoe to her, she said, "Light before, darkness behind, so the prince sees not whether I ride today." The prince couldn't know where she'd gone to this time either. And so he went for a long time around in the world, inquiring after Combland. Okay, I need a drink of water. I gotta get over the Combland thing. Jesus, this guy can't solve a puzzle to save his life. I know. Well, at least his personality's good. But when no one could tell him where it lay, he had it proclaimed that he would marry the one who fit the golden shoe, which should probably sound familiar. Then there came together both the fair and the foul from every quarter, yet none of them had a foot so small that it would fit into the golden shoe. At great, great length, Kari Woodenskirt, mean stepmother, and her daughter came too, remember them? And the shoe fit her, but she was ugly, and looked so repulsive that the prince was loath to do what he had promised. Even so, the wedding was prepared, and she was adorned as a bride. The thing that always boils my brain about these premises is he really not know their face? Like, was it the shoe? Oh, I was looking at their shoes the whole time. I didn't notice that they were two completely different people. But as they rode to church, a little bird sat in the tree singing, "A little piece of heel, a little piece of toe, Kari Woodenskirt's shoe is full of blood." And when they looked, the bird had sung true, for the blood oozed out of the shoe. Then all the servant girls and all the women folk who were at the castle had to come forth and try the shoe on, but it didn't fit any of them. "But where is Kari Woodenskirt, then?" asked the prince, when everyone else had tried. He understood the bird song and remembered well what the bird had said. So why did he ask anybody else? The bird said it was her shoe. Being a bad storyteller. "Oh, her," said the others. "It'll never do any good that she comes forth, for she has the feet of a horse." "Perhaps," said the prince. "But as everyone else has tried, then Kari may too." "Kari!" he cried out through the door, and Kari came up the stairs, her wooden skirt rattling as if it were a whole regiment of marching dragoons. It's a great line. "Now, you too may fit the shoe and become a princess," said the other girls, laughing and mocking her. Kari picked up the shoe and put her foot into it as easily as she liked, cast her wooden skirt off, and stood there in her golden dress so that she gleamed, and on her other foot she had a matching golden shoe. The prince recognized her at once, and was so happy that he went directly to her, took her by the waist and kissed her. And when he heard that she was a king's daughter, he was even gladder. And then there was a wedding, and snip, snap, snout, the tales told out. All right. Let's just collect for a minute the thoughts that have been thrown at us in the end of this tale. This prince is a jerk. I think we can all agree he's a massive jerk. And in most fairy tales and folklore, something would have happened to him. He would have at least said, obviously, you can't judge something by its surface. I've made a mistake, whatever. But none of that. Just none of that. The problem was she was dressed in badly. And if she wasn't, then he would have recognized her value. Number one. Problem one. Problem two, apparently it doesn't bother her to know that he is a complete jerk to everybody he sees below him. And threw stuff at her. Like, he threw water in her face, and he threw a comb at her head. Like, come on. There's, I guess this is very much of the time, but, he's even happier that she's royal blood and not lowly, whatever. But also, he's obviously very stupid. Which, is unfair to say, because in a lot of these tales, people are as dumb as the plot needs them to be. She told him she lived in Towel Land, and he couldn't figure out, after already finding out that that it was a different place than she said last week. It was a different place than she said last week, and he already knows the one that she said last week wasn't real. So why did he think that was real? And third, he doesn't notice that the stepsister had a different face than the woman he remembered, that her foot was bleeding. And then when a bird points it out and calls it Woodenskirt's shoe, he's like, well, we're going to have to check everybody. And they're like, okay, we've checked everybody, I guess, except Woodenskirt. And he was like, well, I remember that song. Oh, that's right. They already told me the answer to this question. Find me a dumber prince. A dumber, less deserving prince in the history of folklore. My God. Like, who isn't supposed to be the villain? Because usually a guy like this would be the villain. The story needs its own version. Needs a different version. My circle of listeners, I guess, to this need to tell a better version of this tale, because this is so stupid. This prince is an idiot. Deserves more things. Jumpstore says, is he any more dumb than the prince in Cinderella who also needed a show for a positive idea of the girl he spent all night dancing with? I think it's implied he was drunk in the original versions of that tale, I suppose. Or at least that's the way I took it. Like, I feel like most versions of, like, the Cinderella tale, as we understand Cinderella anyways. I've talked before about how Cinderella is sort of a filler name for a lot of tales. But for the one that I assume we're talking about, the slipper ones, it's usually at a party, and I feel like the subtext is always that, they got drunk and they don't really remember as very well. That's my take on it. This was church on a Sunday. What's his excuse? Normally I don't do this. Normally I just let stories sit. There's just something about the story. I did enjoy the story, by the way. This is not me complaining about the story. The story is fun in its own ways. I really like the bull character. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. What was going on there? So the bull character, let me give a little context. If you've never looked at any of these tales before, most of the people in my chat have, but if you're watching this, if you're looking, then you've never really heard tales like this. It is not actually that unusual for farm animals of some sort to help someone, a prince or a princess or a beleaguered poor man or whatever else, to become a prince, whatever the case may be. It's not unusual for when they help them that their request in return for the help is to have their head chopped off. The thing is, though, usually that's because they're under a curse, and that curse is resolved in some way through that act, and so they turn into a prince. We've seen an example of that recently, but there's plenty of examples of that. And it seems like that's implied about what's happening here. That she cuts off his head, skins him, puts this stuff into his skin, and then, like, somehow he manifests in a mountain? But we never get anything more on it. Not at all. Which, even for folklore, is a bit weird. Normally they say something. Jumpstar says, oh yes, the best way for anyone to choose their future wife is when they're completely blitzed. Well, I'm sure many have done it. GS says, I never once thought Cinderella's prince was drunk. Boy, am I dense. I don't know if you're dense. I think it's the context that you receive that story. When you're a kid, you don't think about drinking, right? You just hear a story, they have a party or whatever else. But I think it's usually implied. That's why a lot of these tales where they can't figure out who a person is in the morning, they're either masquerade parties or they're parties because people know you drink a bunch of wine and forget stuff. GS says, I was waiting for the bull to turn into something. It's implied that he did. He says, come and knock on the stone door and I'll help. And when she does, a man comes out and we get nothing more than that. Just a man. I like your version, Jumpstore. I don't know if that's the version in this, but that's the version I'm going with. Jumpstore says, so the bull used to be a mountain rather than being sentient and free to move as he wanted to be. He wanted to be a stationary mountain again. Maybe. I mean, that is more inventive, I guess. It's a strange tale in every way. For my purposes, my favorite part of it, which was very compelling to me, because I mentioned last week that I thought it was a very good story. I still think it's a very good story. I think it's a very good story that has a very poorly conceived ending. But I think the best part of it is the relationship between her and the bull. I find that bull very compelling, and these forests of copper and gold, or bronze, I guess, and gold and silver and stuff are quite a feast for the mind and all of that. Jump said, you heard him. Jumpstore said you heard of Marissa editing his canon. You know, I don't believe in canon stuff. Much to the chagrin of many of my listeners. Tammy says, well, that was a great story, Rory. Love the voices. Wonderful as usual. Hope everyone has a good night. Good luck with your surgery, Tammy, and good luck with your surgery, Uncle Kitty. I hope you're watching this well and feeling better. Have to take the puppers out. Hello, puppers. It's good to see you, Jump Store, and Lucy Rose, and GS, and Tammy, and whoever else may be lurking in the chat. Hopefully I didn't forget anybody who was talking tonight. But if you're lurking or whatever else, thank you very much for listening to the story for me. I'm going to go turn my air conditioning on. You folks have yourself a good sleep. I will keep the fire going.